Number 2, let's do a subtraction. Let's do 2 minus 3i minus, now these will be, at least the second one has to be in parentheses, because you're having to, whether you show it or not, and I'm going to show it, you have to distribute, whether you do it in your head or not, you have to distribute that -1. So it's going to be 2 minus 3i minus 9, and then minus 6i. See, I'm distributing that -1. If you can do it in your head, that's great, but be careful. Be very careful. So let's put the real parts together. See, there's the real part. 2 minus 9 is 7, -7. And -3i minus 6i would be -9i. Now, if you end up with an answer, I was writing some stuff up here, so I'll come back, we'll need to talk about it, but I'm going to erase it for now. But if you come up with an answer that comes up like 0 plus 6i, and you write 6i, I'm okay with that. That's the complex form, the real part and the imaginary part. If you just write that, I'm okay with it. If you get 8 plus 0i, and you just write 8, I'm okay with that. That's acceptable for me, and I think acceptable for most, probably Coach Teichman too, for most of the numbers. But just be aware that it does have this, and it does have that if you're writing it in this form. Now let's look at multiplication. Can get a little crazier here. Not too bad, but just, it's got a twist to it. So I go back to what Reagan said. No, it's not that hard, it's just different. Let's do 2 minus 4i times 3 minus 7i. How do you multiply a binomial times a binomial? 4, distribute, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it 4. So I'm going to do my F. 2 times 3 is 6. I'm going to do my outside. I'm going to treat it like a variable. -14i. I'm going to do did I copy that right? Okay, originally, I'll leave it. It's fine. I originally had a plus here, but that's okay. And then on the inside, I'm going to have a -12i. And then at the end, now watch what's going to happen. -4i times -7i is positive 28i squared. It works just like a variable. You know, x times x is x squared. I times I is I squared. Except it's not a variable, so we got to remember what I squared is. See? So here's what's going to happen. Let's pick up from here. So we now have a 6. And if you're okay, I'm going to go ahead and put these together as -26i. Everybody okay? But there's a problem. This is not simplified because a positive 28i squared means positive 28 times, and what is I squared? -1. And so a positive 28 times -1 is a -28. Now that's where they're going to get you. And usually there's 1 or 2 of these on the ACT. Now they'll say it like this. They'll say, if I is equal to -1, square root of -1, then they'll have you do a problem like this. Now, I don't know that what they're telling you helps you a whole lot, but that's what they're talking about. The idea that you take that, you square both sides, that's probably the one that's more, at least on what we're doing here, that's the most important step. So now let's put it in complex form. So 6 minus 28 is my -22. It goes at the front. And then the complex part, the I part, goes at the end, -26i.
Is that always going to stand for like a 1? Or will they...
No, it always stands for, now, that's a good question. I's always the square root of -1. I squared will always be -1. You said 1. No, it's always -1. Yes. That's what you have to watch. So that's the thing that you want to write on your paper when you start doing the classwork. Now, these two are both important because we're fixing to use this one in just a moment. They go hand in hand. If I is the square root of -1, if this is it, I times I is -1. See, that's what you're actually saying. And that's the invention when they invented or came up with a new number. Number 4, I'm going to go to the top of page 69. You may have room. I'm going to go ahead and do number 4 up here. let's do one like this. I always like to do this because, let's do plus. Let's do 4 plus I squared because people want to square the, see, they have this. I put one up here this morning. If you have x plus 2, let's do x plus 7 squared. I can promise you, and I'm going to put an X there because I don't want you to think it's true at all. On the ACT, one of the multiple choice will always be x squared plus 49. See, people want to square that one and square that one. That's not the answer because that's not what that means. You've done, think about FOIL. You've done the F, you've done the L, but you didn't do the O and I. Don't forget, you had one of these on classwork back when we were doing square roots, not I's. So that means 4 plus I times 4 plus I. Okay, so I've got 16, and we'll do the F. The outside is plus 4I. The inside is plus 4I. And the end is plus I squared. Let's clean it up. I got 16 plus 8I. Everything's going hunky-dory till we get to the new part right here. And what is I squared? -1. So I'm going to just put -1. You can put plus a -1. I just don't like double signs. And you get 15 plus 8I. Now you have 6 of those in your classwork. Add, subtract, multiply. I guess you have 2 of each. Now, let's do ones like this. Now, I did the one I'm fixing to do with honors, I did it over here and didn't number it. But I'm just going to put it here in the notes. So let's do the square root of -4. Okay. Up until this point in our math classes, we would say no real answer. And that's what your calculator would say. But there is now an answer. It's a complex answer because think about perfect squares now. What y'all gonna do? Do you agree that the square root of -4 is a -1 times 2 squared? Do it like we've always done it. Do the factor tree, and then, I mean, you know the square root of 4 is 2, but so that part's not hard. But look, the square root of the -1 is I. See, there's the new part. And the square root of the 2 squared is 2. Now, we're not going to leave it like that. We tend to always treat it now like a variable, and we write 2I. Now, these are going to start popping up a lot. Problems that have things like this in them. So we'll do another easy one. What about the square root of -25? It'll be 5I. Let's see why. I want to put the work for you to make sure when you get home to do your classwork tomorrow or in just a few minutes, you won't forget where it came from. -25's factor tree is -1 times 5 squared. So the I is going to come out, the square root of the 5 squared is going to come out, and it's 5I. You'll get comfortable with it enough. I think you will. I've never taught these last ones at this point. I could not find a worksheet with them on it, so I just had to add them myself. It's kind of like the classwork for 28. I had to add some problems because I know what's coming next week. Let's do one more. Let's do the square root of -160. Now this one's a little messier because 160 is not a perfect square. But I would recommend you always put the -1 at the front so you don't forget it. Now let's do the factor tree of 160. It's got a lot of 2's in it. 2 times 80, 40, 20, 10. Am I still on screen? Yeah. And a 5. So I've got a 2 squared with a 10. So that's what I'm going to write. 2 squared times 2 squared times, if y'all are okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the 10 there. If you don't want, you can put the 2 times 5. I'll put the 2 times 5 and then I'll put the 10 when I get to it. So there's my 4 times 10, which is 160. And then there's the negative. Now, what can we do square root? Square root of -1 is I. Square root of 2 squared is 2. The square root of that 2 squared, all three of these we can take square roots of. The square root of that 2 squared is 2. And I'm left a 10 underneath. Now, let's clean this up. We're going to write it 4. Now you put your I here. and you put the square root of 10. You don't want to put it at the end, because here's what happens. If you do 4 square root of 10i, the question is that I under the radical or not? If you were going to do it like this, you would have to put parentheses to show where it is. So that's why I put it over here. There's no question that you took the square root of -1 out of it. Now, if a teacher said to you in college, said you got to write that in standard, in complex form, then that's your imaginary part, and you would have to have a 0 at the front. See, there's your A, and there's your 4 square root of 10, and then there's your I. And that number would actually be in this part of the box, 0 plus 4i square root of 10. It would be in here. Oh, 4 square root of 10i. Now, I don't get that ticky about it. This is fine for me. And we actually do a lot of those when we get started with these. We'll do some of this. And like I said, the calculator's going to help you on some of it, but you got to know how to simplify it. That's it. You've got 15 minutes. Now, you got to use that time. We're bad about packing up and talking. I need lesson 29 Monday. You did really good about turning them in today. Zach got his in the basket. Reagan got hers in the basket. You're 28? Okay. And I will get them back. If you want them back this afternoon, I'll do my best. Katie usually comes by and gets hers, and I try to. A fifth, 6th, and 7th is always hard for me to get theirs graded before Quest, but I try, especially if I know there's people that come back by and get them. If you got some corrections back today, you need to get those done if they're this quarter, especially if it's like 27. Was 27 due this quarter? And then 28, check date was today. 29's check date is Monday, so I need you to get these done. This has to be done before we do lesson 30. Okay, I'm going to quit right there.